Hello, hello. It is Friday, September 11th. You think I would know that because we've been actually commemorating and thinking on September 11th today. However, my name is Angela Hooper-Menifield, and I am here today with your HR moment from Menifield and Associates. So today, as we end this week, I thought it would be really great to talk a little bit about communication. I'm sure most of you, if you're anything like me and the average person, you can speak to the fact of how having communication issues tend to be commonplace. It doesn't really matter who you talk with, where you talk to them from. It can be in the workplace, it can be with our personal relationships, it can be even with strangers sometimes. And I think right now we're seeing a lot of miscommunication uh, when people are trying to engage in topics of sensitivity. But as we think about miscommunication or communication at large, I just like to start today's HR moment to talk a little bit about why it is we should even care about whether or not we communicate effectively with one another. And so here's what we know. Um, Studies have been done with executives, especially senior executives, managers, junior staff, and there was a particular study conducted by the Economist Intelligence Unit, and what they found was communications breakdowns in the workplace led to higher stress levels. So 52% of the people who responded to this survey, so if there were 403, that means over 200 of the people said it increased their stress. It also increased delay or failure to complete projects. That was stated by 44%. Low morale, 31%. Missed performance goals, about 25%. And then lost sales was 18%. And so when we think about having these barriers and these communication problems in the workplace, I think it's incumbent upon us to understand why there is a need to correct them. Because communication problems aren't just about the fact that I say something and someone either interprets it differently or totally misinterprets it, or vice versa. It's about the impact it has on the organization, again, our sales, morale, the bodies of people's stress. And that's definitely a conversation for another day, but the impact that stress can have on us. And so, one of the things I'd like to talk a little bit about is the fact that miscommunication can definitely be linked to some particular problems. And so, as we begin to think about what some of those problems might be, I'm not going to go into all of them because, again, we try to keep these HR moments concise, but I think there are a few that could resonate with all of us. So, one is the fact that people, because they know communication problems exist or they feel that they have been misunderstood in the past, they adopt a principle of it's better to say nothing than to be misinterpreted. And so, what we don't realize when we do this, and I will be the first one to say that I am guilty of adopting this as a style on occasion. Even though I train people on how to communicate effectively, in particular situations, and I have found it to be the ones that I care more about the outcome. So the higher I place that relationship, the greater concern I have over not being misinterpreted. So as a result of that, I often won't say anything. But in the workplace, employees said that they rarely speak up at work because they feel that they would be misunderstood or misinterpreted. And so rather than doing so think about that. If 52% of the people, again, this is part of one particular survey, feel that way, as a supervisor and a leader, what are you not receiving? Like, what are you not hearing from your team? Because again, there is a concern that something they say might be misinterpreted. Another place that misinterpretation and poor communication happens is in meetings. You know, 55% of a quantum fear survey of respondents said that meetings were a prime source of workplace communications. Now, I find this to be pretty funny and interesting because we have conditioned ourselves or told ourselves that in order to avoid miscommunication, we should probably meet with the team. But the reason why that could be is because uh, people interpret the messages and the goals that were expressed in the meeting differently. Oftentimes, again, people feel uncomfortable voicing their opinions. And there is this sentiment that we're spending too much time on unimportant topics. And so, as a result of that, people also feel that there's too little time being devoted to the questions and the discussion. And again, we can work on that by potentially trying to figure out how to run more productive meetings and meetings that are shorter, clear, focused, have one objective, get in, get out. And then maybe people would be more inclined to speak up. The conversation does not get derailed and we'll move forward. Another place we blame miscommunication or we have it is with technology. Nearly half, 46% of the people said that communication problems were as a result of technology, and that's specifically email and texting. Because oftentimes you don't get the opportunity to uh, have further questions, gain more clarity. You don't get to hear tone of voice, see the inflections. And so it's one of the reasons why, especially now that we're in a virtual work environment, I encourage people to turn on cameras and to use Zoom and whatnot as much as they can, because being able to see a person smile when they say something can truly reduce the possibility that maybe what you interpreted as an insult or a dig was not that. So just knowing that people can see your smile and your inflections and all of this other stuff could reduce that. So again, texting and messaging are both two of those things. Now, another one is the fact that people jump to conclusions, right? They hear a percentage of what is being said. They think they already know what a person is going to say. And they then again jump to conclusions. As a result of the jumping to conclusions, things fester privately. It is shared among what we can call cliques or groups. And then the next thing we know, it has been compounded. So false assumptions, false information, all of these things can result in miscommunication. One of my favorite movies is The American President with Michael J. Fox and Michael Douglas, right? And I remember when a character, he talks about, the fact that people will make up their own versions if they don't have the information, which is another place where miscommunication happens. And, we have to do our job as managers and leaders to then therefore fill in the gaps so that people don't create their own versions. And it feels like, I don't have any data to support this, but more times than not, when we do make up our own versions, we make those versions out to be a lot worse than what probably actually was the message. And so here again, this can be another place where there's miscommunication because people jump to conclusions. Another one is where people think saying more is less. So over-explaining. This is actually one of my pet peeves. When people just go on and on instead of, you may ask a yes or no question. You may ask a question that a concise answer does the trick. And then the person goes on and on and on. And so as a result of that, a couple of things can happen. One, people tune you out because once the conversation has extended beyond the fact where you think it should go, people basically turn off. And so maybe the core message, the things they really needed to hear, were not heard. Another thing is it creates confusion because now we're talking about so many other things. I don't even really know what the rest of this conversation is supposed to be. And again, when people are confused, one, they won't act, right? And confused people don't take action. So it creates more questions, many of which they may not even have an opportunity to have addressed. But then it also creates, again, like, why are you telling me all this? And sometimes we feel like people are creating or telling us more as a mechanism to hide what it is we are really wanting to know. And so these are just a few of the places or the reasons why we find miscommunication. We can also talk about behavioral styles, right? Our different styles. Some people talk at a slower pace, some faster. Some people are more energetic and outgoing. Some people are more reserved in how they deliver content. And sometimes we have convinced ourselves that we can read body language. And I tell people all the time, unless you've taken courses in neural linguistic processing, NLP, get out of the body language business. And if you wonder if there is something in the body language that you really need to be focused on, ask the question. Because again, what you have probably done is one of the ways I just mentioned. You jumped to conclusions. And so we don't want you to do that. We want you to ask the question, get clarity, and find out what's going on. But miscommunication happens everywhere. And in the workplace, it happens quite frequently because, again, people are afraid of the consequence of either speaking up or just saying to the person, this is not clear or you're confusing me. And so we talked about it in the beginning, but I feel the need to reiterate it. There is a consequence. There is a direct correlation between people's stress, between morale issues, and between also having the ability to feel like you can express yourself and so on. And it goes back to poor communication. There's a correlation between goals not being met, sales not being converted, and all of these other things. So if we want to be able to complete our projects, connect with people in a way that's positive, I think it is imperative upon us that we find ways to communicate and to do so in a more effective way. And today's not that talk, but sometimes in order for us to realize that we need a fix, we have to just stop and take inventory and acknowledge that our current status is not where we desire to be. And so as you think through this, especially again, these HR moments are for everyone, but we're targeting and we want to help supervisors, managers, leaders, people who we can say carry a little bit more of the responsibility to ensuring the communication is effective. So, we'd love to serve and help if there's any way we can do there. But again, today is not that video or that HR moment. Today is really for us to think into where in our organizations or in our lives can we more effectively communicate. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is if you're finding this to be a common thread in some of the places you show up, whether that's your religious organization, your sorority, fraternity, some civic organizations you're a part of, your job, your home life, one might ask, is it possible? Not necessarily 100%, but is it possible that you might need to look at your communication style? Or if it were me, I need to, right? Because that's the common denominator. And it doesn't, again, make it wrong, but at a certain point, I can speak personally to this. You get tired of being misinterpreted. And I know there was a season in my life that I felt highly misunderstood. And I was, but I also came to realize that I didn't understand myself as well. And we also know that perception is reality. And I had to ask myself not so much what my intent was, but what was being received. And was there a different way that I could deliver the information to get a different result? Because I could belabor or bemoan the point all day long that it was the other person. But at the end of the day, at some point, we all have to own part of the miscommunication. So if there is a miscommunication and I'm a part of it, then a part of it is still on me. Um, and so this is not a finger pointing exercise. It's more of a self-awareness exercise. Like we all have blind spots. All of us do. Some of us, video sometimes is the best thing because we're not aware of some of the facial expressions we make. And again, not that people should be interpreting them, but they do. Maybe we're not cognizant of how animated we are and how that could be misinterpreted. And so I leave you with a final story. I think stories always kind of bring the point home. So about 7 years ago, when I was a manager in the government, actually, I had an employee come to me and say that they were really upset because one of their peers, so both of them were on the same staff, they felt was talking to them inappropriately. And so I said, well, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Have they said some things that were not appropriate? And they said, no, I just feels as if she's always yelling at me. And I said, really? And they said, yeah, she yells at me all the time and it's disrespectful and I don't like it. And I said, okay, well, thank you for sharing that. Let me look into it. And so I, paid close attention and observed. I never saw evidence of this. So, but to just check in with the person to see how they were doing, we had a follow-up conversation. And I said, well, I just wanted to come back and see how things were going. I said, because we had a general conversation I did with the person about, appropriate tone and language and things like that. The person heard it. I could tell that they were a little oblivious, like felt like just a general conversation because they didn't feel like any of it was applicable for them. And so when I went back to the person to just check in with them to see if things gotten better, their response to me was actually, no, they're the same, but I feel better now. And I said, really? And they said, yeah, because I noticed they yell at you too. So I started laughing because I have no knowledge of anybody like yelling at me ever. Definitely not at that time in my life. And so I said, they yelled at me and they said, well, yeah and no. I noticed that they were really loud and you and them were talking and you seemed to not, the conversation just kept rolling. So it was in that moment I realized they weren't yelling at me either, but they're just loud. And so then I laughed. I said, okay, well, great, because trust me, I have never felt that the person has yelled at me. But one of the things that I could say about this person was they were highly animated. So their hands would move all around when they would talk, and the more excited they got, their pitch would elevate, right? Never to their awareness had they thought that anybody that they worked with thought that they were yelling at them. And only one person interpreted it that way because no one else did either. And so these people actually went on to be great friends, very close. I think still to this day, talk with some regular frequency. And even though they're no longer in the same office or under the same management. But I say all that to say that is a perfect example of not having the awareness of who people are. We talk about inclusion. Inclusion also means people can be their whole self. And the person wasn't loud to the point that it was unprofessional. They were just animated. And the person that felt this way was more reserved and laid back, right? And so while both have a right to bring their whole self to the workplace and have an expectation that conversations are amenable to their palate or pleasing to their liking, we also don't want to jump to the conclusion that someone is being something that they're not or communicating in a style that's not appropriate. So that's my example of the stress and some of the other things that could it could impact when we miscommunicate and don't have the conversation. And so I left that conversation again, feeling pleased that we had worked it out, but also leaving with the other person that in the future, if you feel as if someone is not talking to you in a way that is acceptable to you, it is okay to say that. You could just say, hey, could you, bring it down just a little bit? And hopefully the person will receive it. But no, they were like, no, I'm fine, because, if they're yelling at you and you're their boss, then clearly they're not yelling, and you didn't seem to take it that way. So we laughed and moved on. But we want to be able to find out, is this the issue or what we're thinking accurate? Or is it possible that our perspective and how the box that we put things in and how we make assumptions sometimes that everyone has to communicate the same way that we do, could our judgment just be a little, off? Again, not saying there's a right or wrong, just bringing to the table the fact that we're different and how we perceive and receive things can vary from person to person. So, thank you guys for watching. I hope you had a great week. I know for many of us it was a shortened week, but I hope you had a great week. Next week, half of September is already gone. So it is really go time towards your goals and your objectives. And again, new to supervision, just hang in there. It gets better. It's an adjustment from transitioning from a peer to a supervisor, but we're here to help you with that. So have a great weekend. Be safe, everybody. Take care of yourselves, and we look forward to seeing you on next week. Bye.